Hello, everybody. My name is James Agnew, aka In Philosopher's Garb. I'm a Christian theologian, and today I want to bring you all something a little bit different. So, recently at the presidential inauguration, the day of the presidential inauguration, a bishop gave a short sermon that has caused some controversy. Many of you, if you've clicked on this video, you already probably have seen it or have heard about it. What I want to do in this video is give my perspective as someone who is literally an expert in Christianity, an expert in Christian theology. I want to listen to this woman's sermon, or this last part of the woman's sermon, because this is the section that's generating so much heat. And then I want to look how other Christians from the right side of the political spectrum have been responding to this sermon, and see if there's any meat on the bone of their criticisms, and see is there anything to their objections. And so, with that said, I'm just going to go ahead and play this short section of the sermon, and then I'll kind of address some of the theological ideas in there, see how it corresponds to the Bible, and then we'll move on to looking at some clips or some, Twitter posts or things like that from people who've been objecting to this sermon, and we'll see how accurate are those critiques, how well do they reflect the supposed Christianity of the people making them. So with that said, let's go ahead and roll the clip.
Let me make one final plea, Mr. President. Millions have put their trust in you. And as you told the nation yesterday, you have felt the providential hand of a loving God. In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families, some who fear for their lives. And the people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who labor in poultry farms and meat packing plants, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospitals, they may not be citizens or have the proper documentation, but the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. They pay taxes and are good neighbors. I ask you to have mercy, Mr. President, on those in our communities whose children fear that their parents will be taken away, and that you help those who are fleeing war zones and persecution in their own lands to find compassion and welcome here. Our God teaches us that we are to be merciful to the stranger, for we were all once strangers in this land.
Okay, so let's address this sermon now from a theological perspective. Let's ask the question, is this sermon, is it based in the Bible? Are these ideas biblical? Are these ideas something that Jesus would affirm and be okay with, stuff like that? The answer to that is going to be, for anyone who actually takes their Bible seriously, is going to be obviously yes. So the main theme in this section of the sermon is imploring people, specifically the president, to have mercy. And the people that is being employed or implored for him to have mercy on is the immigrants of various types, and gay and trans children or people from across the political spectrum. Now, the idea of imploring people to have mercy, this is something we see all throughout the Bible, along with the idea of being gentle and compassionate to the destitute, the afflicted, the oppressed, things along those lines. So let's give some examples here. So Psalm 82:3 says, "Give justice to the weak and the fatherless, maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute." Isaiah 1:17 says, "Learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause." Jeremiah 22:3 says, "Thus says the Lord, do justice and righteousness, and deliver from the hand of the oppressor him who has been robbed, and do no wrong or violence to the resident alien, the fatherless, and the widow, nor shed innocent blood in this place." Deuteronomy 10:18-19 says, "He executes justice for the fatherless and the widow," it's talking about God, "and loves the sojourner, giving him food and clothing. Love the sojourner, therefore, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt." That specific quote that I just referenced from Deuteronomy seems to be one that the bishop referenced. We see again in Isaiah God telling people to wash yourselves, make yourselves clean, remove the evil of your deeds from before my eyes, cease to do evil, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause. So this idea we get all throughout the Old Testament is those who are oppressed, those who are vulnerable and and weak and destitute, be merciful to them, seek justice for them, plead their cause. We also get this idea of imploring people to be merciful in the New Testament explicitly from the mouths of Jesus. Jesus said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." In Matthew 10 through 13, we're told that Jesus reclined at a table in the house, and behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. So these are tax collectors and sinners. These are the bad. These are the people who they are engaging in things that are morally wrong, and Jesus is eating with them. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, Jesus' disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard it, he said, this being Jesus, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." So this is Jesus. He's surrounded by the people in his community who people would be, wagging their fingers at and looking down on and saying, "Oh, these people are immoral. These people, are corrupt," things like that. And he's hanging out with them. And when people say, "Why would you hang out with people like this?" He says, "These are the people that need a physician. Go learn what it means. I desire mercy." We get this idea again in Luke 6:35 through 36. "But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. For he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful." So again, we have this explicit command to love your enemies and be merciful because our Father in heaven is merciful. James says, "For judgment is without mercy to those who have shown no mercy." In John 8, there's a story of an adulterous woman. So this is a woman who she has committed sexual sins. The right who have been criticizing this woman are really obsessed with sexual sins. She has committed a sexual sin. It says she was caught in adultery, okay? She is brought before Jesus, and according to the law of Deuteronomy, it was appropriate to stone her at that point. And so they bring her before Jesus, and they say, "Okay, Jesus, what are we going to do here?" And Jesus, I'm going to summarize the story. Jesus says, "Let you who are without sin throw the first stone." And then everyone walks away because they know they're not without sin. And then Jesus looks at the woman who, again, she could be stoned under the law, and he says, "Does no one here condemn you? Neither do I. Go forth and sin no more." This is a woman. She committed a crime. It was a sexual sin. Jesus doesn't mercilessly punish her. He says, "Go forth and sin no more." He shows mercy on her. Now I will point out, I have to point this out, that section from John 8, that pericope, is generally recognized by textual critics as not being in the original text of the Gospel of John. It's a later interpolation. However, people who specialize in have looked at this issue in depth, think that although this story was not original to the book of John, they do think, many scholars, if not most scholars, think that this does reflect an authentic historical Jesus tradition. So this is something that we have good grounds for thinking that Jesus said and did. So this is a thoroughly biblical message. It is imploring a person who is in power to have mercy on people who are potentially going to be scared by Trump's incoming, presidency. And they would be scared for good reason, because Trump has used very inflammatory rhetoric when talking about these people groups, and he has talked about targeting them. And as we'll probably see in a few minutes, he has already started to target them. So from a theological perspective, this is completely fine. Now we might talk about, well, is this appropriate from a sermon giving perspective? Now, I am not a pastor by trade. That is not that's not my specialty. And so there's a whole discussion here about what is the purpose of a sermon, what is the purpose of a homily, things like that. I'm inclined to think that most pastors, if they were going to, if you were to ask them, what do you think is the purpose of a sermon? What do you think is the purpose of a homily? I think generally in that discussion, there's going to be some things along the lines of recognizing specific needs in their audience, recognizing specific needs that need to be addressed in their community and addressing those needs. There's going to be the idea of encouraging others to engaging in virtuous action and walking out their faith in an appropriate way that resembles the life of Christ. So that's one of the ideas. Is actually, as much as someone who's like me, I'm really focused on analytic arguments and research. Quite frankly, that's probably not what the Sunday morning is about. Sunday mornings are generally more about encouraging the Christian community to walk out their faith in Christ grace, and so calls to, encouraging one another to act in the appropriate ways. And of course, sprinkling teaching in with that is appropriate. And this woman, I think, is doing that, is sprinkling and teaching of, the mercy that we are to call to others. So it doesn't seem like she's doing anything inappropriate from a theological perspective. It doesn't seem like she's doing anything inappropriate as far as what would be fitting to a sermon. I will point out here that if you're going to a church and the sermons never challenge you, if you're picking up the Bible and reading it and it's never challenging you and it's never making you feel uncomfortable, is probably something wrong. The Bible is going to make us feel uncomfortable when we read and we have the Word taught to us. It is implying a perfect standard onto us of how we should act towards others, and so it's normal to feel uncomfortable. It's normal to feel kind of almost like on guard when hearing the virtue and the morality that we are being called to, and that's okay, so long as, I think, and this is my perspective, I think that's fine. It just needs to make sure that the person who is giving the sermon is doing this in a way that's gentle. It's not, scolding. It's not yelling. A gentle invitation to those in the audience that it's not belittling. It's not holier than thou. It's just a gentle invitation to walk out the faith that we all are saying that we are a part of. Okay, so as a theologian, I see nothing theologically problematic in this statements. As again, not a pastor, but as someone who, I know pastors, and I've sat in I've sat in class with people who are pastors or engaged in ministry or things like that. I've had obviously teachers who are pastors. I don't think from like a sermon or a homily perspective she did anything inappropriate or weird here. Now, with this in mind, let's go forth and see how the Christian community, let's see how the Christian evangelicals are responding to this perfectly Christian. Like, this is completely fine. And whether or not you think this woman, whether or not her other politics, you think there's anything wrong, whether or not you think there's other theological positions that she holds to that you think are, as far as just the sermon that we just heard, there's nothing wrong with it objectively from a biblical stance. So let's see how those in the Christian God-fearing right-wing media, let's see how they're engaging with this. Let's start with none other than Charlie Kirk.
I'm actually glad she did this. It shows the bitterness, the improper behavior, the violating of customs of what the American left has actually become. The sloppy theology.
Oof, okay, so here we see several accusations. We see the claim that this shows bitterness, improper behavior, and violating customs. So a couple things here. First off, I don't see how any person can watch that video of her gently and kindly encouraging another person to have mercy on the vulnerable and say that this reflects bitterness. As I noted a while ago, the things that she said, this is perfectly biblical. This is an accurate representation of the type of ethics and the type of virtue that is depicted in the Bible. And so if you think that this woman is depicting bitterness, improper behavior, or violating customs, then I'm pretty confident that if Jesus himself came down here and, gave a lecture to the president, you also would be accusing Jesus of being bitter. You would accuse Jesus of being engaged in improper behavior and violating customs. And this is one of the big issues I have with these far-right evangelicals is any accusation that you're going to cast at this woman for this specific sermon, you're not casting it at her. You're casting it at Jesus, because she is walking in this statement, and what she's saying, this is reflective of the ideology. This is reflective of the disposition that Jesus teaches us, which is to be merciful to all as our Father has been merciful to us. Now, regarding the claim of this is sloppy theology, I've already talked about how this is a great representation of not only how God is depicted in the Old Testament when he is shepherding the people of Israel and trying to correct their behaviors and telling them to be kind to foreigners and to be, stand up for the weak and destitute, things like that. And that's an accurate representation of Jesus in the New Testament when he not only encourages us to be merciful, but Jesus befriends and he hangs out with people who would be considered, the type of people that Charlie Kirk would be snubbing his nose at. Jesus hangs out with them, and even instances in which people commit crimes, even instances in which the community would say this person should be punished, and the law themselves would say that this needs to be punished. Jesus says to let those without sin throw the first stone, and he says, "Go forth and sin no more." Jesus shows mercy. So there is nothing sloppy about this theology. So we have to ask ourselves, why is Charlie here why is he filled with so much venom? Why, sincerely, like, why is this guy filled with so much venom to this priest, to this bishop who is giving a perfectly normal, fine sermon? Is because these guys, I mean, listen, this is a bit of psychoanalyzing for my part, and I'll own up to that. It seems like Charlie went into this looking for a reason to complain. Charlie is so dedicated to defending Trump at all cost that any hint of the slightest issue in any of his actions, any gentle nudging. She didn't even say, "Trump, you've done something wrong." She didn't even say, "Hey, Trump, you've been a bad boy." She literally just says, "There are a lot of people who are scared. Please be merciful to them." Like it's a statement about it's an objective statement. There are people who are scared, and then it's another just a request. Please be merciful to them. There isn't even a statement on wrongdoing on Trump's part. But yet people like Charlie, they just seem so committed to being inflamed at any slightest criticism of Trump. They not only project their hatred onto this bishop, they project that hatred, quite frankly, onto the ideology of Christ himself. If Christ came down and preached a similar message that he preached in the Bible, I think guys like Charlie Kirk would be sitting there telling them that they're socialist, woke, left, liberal, bitter, yada yada yada, because Jesus would be telling people to, if you have two tunics, give one to the one who's needy. God in the Old Testament tells farmers to, when they are harvesting their field, to not harvest all of it, but to leave a portion for the poor to come and glean off of, and things like that. So, anyways, that's Charlie.
First of all, Charlie, who does she think she is? Don't let her little frail demeanor fool you. The magnitude of arrogance and pride that she exhibited to disgrace the U.S. president, to school him like she did.
So the idea of how dare she do this, how, like, even if this was fine, how dare she do it in this setting? It's a sermon. This is her job. Her job is not to make the president or the audience or whoever or is in her job is not to make you feel good. Her job is to preach the word of God and encourage people to follow the teaching of Christ. And we are told in Matthew 5:13 through 16, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." The idea that, she should just be, the idea that she needs to give a politically correct sermon, that's what's hilarious here. Is these people who are complaining about wokeness are the same people who would object to, having to be politically correct all the time. They're mad that she did not give a politically correct sermon. They're mad that she gave a sermon which was targeted towards a problem in our society, which is the demonization of and the cruel treatment of a specific vulnerable class of people. That's what these people are really crying about. Okay, I want to make that clear. They are crying that this bishop had the audacity to give to what is to them a politically incorrect sermon, which criticized their supreme leader. That's what's going on here. And I want to point out the idea that, well, listen, if you're before a king or a leader or a president, you shouldn't use that as an opportunity to, preach the gospel. You shouldn't use that as an opportunity to make a point. Have you read the book of Acts? That's like half of it. These people have not read their Bible, or if they have, they haven't been paying attention.
on top of the overwhelming fact that she has no business being there. And that's according to the scriptures. She's usurping authority. She's in a position that the scriptures, 1st and 2nd Timothy says ought not to be happening.
So that's absolute nonsense. So there is a verse in the letters to Timothy that sometimes people try to go to in order to support this argument that women should not be able to have any type of teaching position over men. I have a 2-hour video on my channel where I go through and I respond to one of these such arguments in great depth. I will defer people to that. Also, I will defer people to this blog, the Taryn Williams. They've put out a great blog series where they go through all of these major arguments for why women should not be allowed to be in a teaching position in a church, and they just slap them down, quite frankly, with a scholarly level argumentation. They put out really great stuff. Highly recommend that. Michael Bird is a New Testament scholar who has a YouTube channel. He's been putting stuff out about this as well. This is simply false. This is a narrative that gets proposed and is circulated and treated as gospel, but it is not actually representative of what the Bible says. And in fact, some of these verses that they go to make these arguing points. So for instance, in this Charlie Kirk video, the gentleman that was before this guest mentioned a verse in the New Testament about how a woman shouldn't even be allowed to speak in church. That verse is probably not even actually originally in the Bible, that not in the letter that Paul wrote. That is a verse, one in Corinthians, about women not being allowed to teach. That is a verse that many scholars have argued is an interpolation. It is something a later scribe or editor or something like that have inserted it in, and there are strong arguments for why that is the case. If you're interested in that, I do recommend this book by Philip Payne, where he gives the manuscript evidence and the textual evidence that those such verses were actually inserted later on. So just simply, this is nonsense.
She used her sermon to treat us like vermin. That was infantile. But she kind of looks familiar to me. Was she once a news reporter for WKRP in Cincinnati? I've seen more attractive bishops on a chessboard.
Okay, so here we see the incredibly Christ-like response of insulting the woman's appearance and accusing that she treated you like vermin. If a person encouraging another person to be merciful, if that's them treating you poorly, I think that speaks more about the depths of your own depravity than it does about the message of the sermon. And, you insulting this woman for her appearance, that also speaks to the depths of your depravity.
She is the worst preacher I have ever in my life heard. It was awful. It was so bad. I'm grateful my wife was not there. She would have ran out of that church. I could not believe that she would use that moment to speak a demonic message as if she was using the Bible. She used her platform to practice theological malpractice.
Okay, so couple things here. First off, screaming that it's a bad sermon doesn't explain why it's a bad sermon. Second, accusing this of being demonic when, as I noted and towards the beginning of this video, this is a perfectly Christian, Christ-like attitude to be having towards other people, is to imploring them to have mercy. That is coming actually dangerously close to what Christ says is the only unforgivable sin, which is blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. But moving past that, the idea that this is theological malpractice, he doesn't give any arguments for that. He asserts it, and this is a guy who he claims to be a Christian himself. He says this is theological malpractice. No, it's not. This is literally what the Bible teaches. This is what Christians for centuries have recognized. It is only within this incredibly odd, bizarre, modern American moment where people who call themselves Christians have to get mad at the slightest idea of being, compassionate to other people, being merciful to other people, who worship at the feet of Donald Trump so much that any pretense, anything even resembling a criticism of him comes across as, a defiance of their religion. This is the religion of Donald Trump. That's what we're looking at here. The fact that they perceive this as a critique of Donald Trump, and then they are therefore saying this is theological malpractice, to me, this is indicating they don't worship Jesus. They're not following Jesus. They're not following his commandments. They have, whether they recognize it or not, it seems like they are morphing into worshiping Donald Trump and saying, don't you ever blaspheme Donald Trump, don't you ever criticize Donald Trump. It's incredibly bizarre, incredibly bizarre. Okay, so I could keep on showing clips. There's a lot of these, but that would make this video unnecessarily long. So I want to draw this to a close by making two kind of overarching points. So the first point is there are going to be some people who they're so gung-ho about there being a border problem that they're gonna hop in my comments and they're just gonna like rage about that. I don't care whether or not you think there's a border problem. The question that's in debate, like under this sermon, like this sermon doesn't say anything about whether there's a border problem. This sermon doesn't say anything about whether or not anybody should be deported. It doesn't make any of those comments. This sermon just says, be merciful. If you want to say, hey, listen, we need to deport everyone. I mean, I think that's a stupid idea for many reasons, but if you want to say that, hey, listen, we should deport everyone, I'm going to ask you, can you do it mercifully? Because if yes, then you shouldn't have a problem with this sermon. Okay, so this isn't about do you think there's a problem with immigrants crossing the border. This isn't a This isn't an issue about do you think that it's morally acceptable to engage in homosexual activity or for the to approve of certain operations with trans kids. That's not what this is about. This is about a woman just saying, people are scared, please be merciful. That is what was said. This is not a statement about what policy should be enacted. This is not a statement about what policy shouldn't be enacted. And anybody who comes to this video and they read that into it, that is a projection of their own issues into the mouth of this bishop. So it just quite simply isn't about all that. Now I want to point out also that people who are concerned, people who are scared about Trump's policies, it isn't just people who are here illegally. I mean, Trump tried to make it so that birthright citizenship is to be done away with. People who are here legally are scared that Trump is going to enact policies that allow racial profiling, and this is something that news organizations and news outlets are talking about. Is there have been these deportation efforts. They don't require trials. The mechanisms through which this stuff is going on, even if you think it needs to be done, are things which they present the opportunity for abuse. They present the opportunity for families to be torn apart, and people are rightfully scared about that. And so even if you think something like that needs to be done, that does not undercut the need for mercy in how we do it. So that's point number one. Now, point number two is I'm going to say this. A person and their standing, whether or not someone's a Christian, I don't have the spiritual clearance. I don't have the spiritual security clearance to say whether or not a person is saved or whether or not they're a Christian, so on and so forth. I will say this, that these people who are venomously and with vileness talking about this bishop, saying that she is pathetic, saying that she needs to be deported, saying that she's ugly, just all these things, saying that she's bitter and that this is politicizing. All these people saying this, I don't know what spirit it is that is speaking through you there, but I'm quite confident it's not the Spirit of Christ. And if you sit down and you just read through one of the Gospels, and for many of these people, I bet it's been a while since they've done that, if ever. If you sit down and you read through the Gospels, you do not get a picture of a Christ who would approve of this type of venom that's being pointed at this woman. So I personally don't think someone can has any biblical grounds to object to what this bishop said in the sermon. So people who are crying and raging about this and getting bent out of shape and complaining about, oh, this woke bishop, you are telegraphing to the world your spiritual depravities. You are telegraphing to the world your own spiritual malfunctions. That you hear a woman gently pleading for our leader to be merciful to a group of scared people who have a right to be scared. You hear her pleading, hey, please be merciful, and you project all of this into her mouth and you project all of this venom onto her. That is a you problem. That's a you problem. That is not a her problem. And so what I suggest you do is if you've had this type of venom directed at her, why don't you go sit down? why don't you pick a gospel? Now, there's 4 of them. Pick a gospel, read through it, and pray. And you and Jesus have a talk. Because this type of venom is not of Christ. This is not of Christ.